The chandeliers sparkled at the Preston Hotel's grand ballroom. Nathan Carlyle stood tall in his expensive suit, his arm wrapped around Victoria Stone's waist. She was everything that screamed success, tall, blonde, and dressed in a designer gown that probably cost more than what most people made in a month. Nobody would guess she wasn't his wife. "Nathan, darling, the Thompson deal must be celebrated properly," Victoria purred, running her manicured fingers down his arm. "You've just become the youngest billionaire in New York." Nathan smiled, but his eyes scanned the room. He knew the whispers were starting. Everyone in New York's high society knew he was married, just not to the woman by his side. His wife, Claire, was probably at home right now, like always. Sweet, simple Claire, who still bought her clothes off the rack and didn't know the difference between white wine and champagne. "Mr. Carlyle," a group of investors approached them. "That Thompson merger was brilliant. You must tell us how you managed to close it." Victoria jumped right in, talking about market strategies and profit margins, like she'd been part of the deal herself. Nathan watched her work the room. This was why he needed her. Claire would have just stood quietly beside him, smiling that shy smile of hers. "Nathan?" A familiar voice cut through the chatter. His heart stopped. Claire stood at the entrance of the ballroom, but this wasn't the Claire he knew. This Claire wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her curves perfectly. Her usually loose brown hair was swept up elegantly, showing off a pair of diamond earrings he'd never seen before. She looked breathtaking. The room went silent. Victoria's grip on his arm tightened. "Claire," Nathan managed to say, I didn't expect you here." "Clearly," Claire replied, her voice steady. She looked at Victoria, then back at him. "I thought I should surprise my husband at his big celebration, though it seems I'm the one getting the surprise." The whispers grew louder. Nathan saw phones being pulled out. Tomorrow this would be all over the society pages. Mrs. Carlyle, James Thompson himself, stepped forward, ignoring Nathan completely. "You look stunning tonight. Would you honor me with a dance?" Claire smiled, not her usual shy smile, but something confident, almost radiant. "I'd love to." Nathan watched as Thompson led his wife to the dance floor. Other men were already lining up for their turn. Claire moved with grace he'd never noticed before, laughing at something Thompson said. "Nathan, everyone's staring," Victoria hissed. "Do something." But what could he do? Make a scene? That would only make things worse. So he stood there, feeling like a fool, watching as his wife became the center of attention. "Did you know Claire donated that old building of yours to create a women's shelter?" He overheard Mrs. Anderson, one of the biggest society matrons, telling her friends. So modest about it too, not like some people who need their name on everything they touch. "And did you hear about her literacy program in the Bronx?" Another woman chimed in. "My daughter volunteers there. Says Claire comes in every week to read to the children herself." Nathan felt like he was in some twisted dream. How had he never known about any of this? He'd always seen Claire as this simple, quiet woman who couldn't fit into his world. But looking at her now, he realized she'd built her own world, one with more substance than his cocktail parties and business deals. The night wore on like torture. Every time he tried to approach Claire, someone else would whisk her away. She never looked at him once, but her laughter echoed through the ballroom, real and warm, unlike the practiced titters he was used to hearing at these events. "I'm leaving," Victoria announced around midnight. "This is humiliating. Call me when you've sorted this mess out." Nathan barely noticed her go. He was still watching Claire, who was now chatting with a group of his biggest investors. They were hanging on her every word. Finally, the crowd began to thin. He saw Claire heading toward the exit and rushed to catch her. "Claire, wait. Let me explain." She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw the pain behind her composed expression. "Explain what, Nathan? How you've been parading your mistress around New York while I sat at home. How everyone knew except me?" I made a mistake." "No," Claire said softly. "Your mistake was thinking I would stay that naive girl you married forever, the one who didn't fit into your perfect world." She slipped off her wedding ring and placed it in his palm. "I've outgrown that girl, Nathan, and I've outgrown you." She walked away, leaving him standing alone in the hotel lobby, clutching her ring. Through the revolving doors, he watched as she stepped into a waiting car. James Thompson's car. Nathan Carlyle. Had everything, wealth, power, and a wife who loved him completely. In one night, he realized he might have lost the only thing that really mattered. And for what? A woman who'd already left him? A reputation that now lay in shambles? As he drove home to his empty mansion, his phone buzzed with notifications. The society pages were already having a field day, but it was one particular photo that caught his eye. Claire laughing in Thompson's arms, looking more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. The caption read, "Claire Carlyle steals the show at I. Thompson merger celebration, while husband Nathan Carlyle's mistress storms out alone." Nathan threw the phone aside and gripped the steering wheel tighter. How had he never seen what was right in front of him? And more importantly, was it too late to get it back? Claire sat in her new apartment, surrounded by moving boxes. The morning sun streamed through windows that overlooked Central Park, a view she never would have afforded on her own. But James Thompson had insisted on helping her find a place after that night at the gala. "You deserve better than hiding away in some tiny studio," he'd said. "Let me at least give you a fresh start." Her phone hadn't stopped ringing for days. Nathan's name flashed on the screen again, the 20th call today. She let it go to voicemail, just like all the others. The doorbell rang. Claire opened it to find a massive bouquet of roses. "Mrs. Carlyle, these are for you." Behind the flowers stood Amy, her best friend since college. "I saw the news," Amy said, pushing past the delivery man. "Why didn't you tell me what was going on?" Claire sighed, dropping the roses in the trash. They were from Nathan, of course. "I wanted to handle it myself. I needed to know I could." "Well, you certainly handled it. Have you seen the society pages? They're calling it the revenge of the century. Nathan Carlyle's perfect world crumbling, while his wife emerges as New York's new sweetheart." Claire walked to the window. Below, paparazzi lingered, hoping to catch a photo of her. How strange that they suddenly found her interesting now. "I didn't do it for revenge." "No?" Amy raised an eyebrow. "So that gorgeous dress, those diamond earrings, dancing with James Thompson all night, that wasn't about making Nathan jealous. The dress was because I was tired of hiding. The earrings were my grandmother's, and James..." Claire smiled slightly. "James was just being kind." "Kind?" Amy snorted. "Honey, no billionaire is just kind to beautiful women, especially not when they're about to be single." The doorbell rang again. This time it was Nathan himself, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Claire, please," he begged. "Just give me 5 minutes." She almost closed the door in his face, but something in his eyes, desperation, fear, maybe even real regret, made her pause. 5 minutes, she said. "Amy, would you give us a moment?" Amy squeezed her hand before leaving. "Call me if you need anything." Nathan stood in her new living room, looking lost. His usual perfect appearance was rumpled, his tie loose. "You've been ignoring my calls. Did you expect me to pick up? To listen to your excuses? They're not excuses. Claire, what you saw that night, Victoria meant nothing." Claire laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think this is just about Victoria? This is about years of making me feel small, of treating me like I was something to be ashamed of." "I was never ashamed, really." Claire's voice rose. "Is that why you stopped taking me to business dinners? Why you always had some excuse when there were important events? Why you needed someone more suitable on your arm?" Nathan ran his hands through his hair. "I was wrong, I see that now. Watching you that night, seeing how everyone responded to you, I realized what an idiot I've been. That's the problem. Nathan, you only saw my worth when others did. When I finally fit your image of what a wife should be. No, that's not. Your 5 minutes are up." Claire opened the door. "I have a meeting at the women's shelter." "You're really leaving me?" Nathan's voice cracked. "Throwing away 8 years of marriage? No, Nathan, you threw it away. One party at a time, one lie at a time, one night with Victoria at a time. I'm just finally walking away from the wreckage." After he left, Claire sank onto her couch, tears finally falling. Her phone buzzed. A text from James Thompson. "Lunch tomorrow? I'd love to discuss expanding your literacy program citywide." Claire wiped her eyes. Yes, her marriage was over. But maybe this was just the beginning of something else. Something that was all hers. Across town, Nathan sat in his office staring at old photos on his phone. Claire at their wedding, looking at him like he was her whole world. Claire at the beach laughing as waves crashed around her. Simple moments he'd taken for granted. His secretary buzzed, "Mr. Carlyle, the board is waiting for the emergency meeting." Right. The meeting. Ever since the scandal broke, his investors had been nervous. The press was having a field day with his personal life, and it was affecting business. Mr. Carlyle? James Thompson stood in his office doorway, looking immaculate as always. "Before the meeting starts, I thought you should." "No, I've offered Claire a position as director of our new charitable foundation." Nathan's hands clenched. "Stay away from my wife." "Ex-wife soon enough," Thompson smiled. "And Claire's quite capable of making her own decisions now. Isn't that what's really bothering you?" As Thompson walked away, Nathan felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Real fear. Not just of losing Claire, but of watching her build a new life where he was nothing but a cautionary tale. A mistake she'd been smart enough to walk away from. He picked up his phone and dialed Victoria's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Don't bother calling again," her message said. "I don't date has-beens." Nathan Carlyle, the man who once had everything, sat alone in his office as his empire began to crumble. Outside, New York's elite were already choosing sides. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't the one holding the cards. Claire, the wife he'd thrown away, was rewriting the rules of his game, and he was just beginning to realize how badly he'd lost. Nathan's world was falling apart. His office felt colder now, emptier. The board meeting had been a disaster. 3 major investors had pulled out, citing concerns about leadership stability. His phone buzzed with another message from his lawyer. Claire had officially filed for divorce. He poured himself another drink, his third of the morning. On his desk, newspapers screamed headlines he couldn't bear to read. Claire Carlyle, From Shadow to Spotlight, and Thompson Industries launches 50-meter charitable foundation. With Claire Carlyle at helm, a knock at his door made him look up. It was his mother, Eleanor Carlyle, elegant as always in her pearls and designer suit. "You look terrible," she said, closing the door behind her. "Thanks, Mom. Just what I needed to hear." Eleanor sat down, her disapproving gaze taking in the empty glasses. "I warned you about Victoria Stone. That woman has ruined better men than you." "This isn't about Victoria." "No," Eleanor agreed. "It's about how you treated Claire, the only good thing you ever had in your life, and you threw her away like yesterday's newspaper." Nathan slumped in his chair. "I know I messed up." "Messed up? Nathan, you humiliated that girl. And now she's finally found her wings." Eleanor's voice softened. "I had lunch with her yesterday." Nathan's head snapped up. "You did? She's doing amazing work with that foundation, helping women start their own businesses, teaching them to giving them a chance at a better life." Eleanor smiled. "Everything you could have supported if you hadn't been so busy chasing some artificial idea of success." "I can fix this," Nathan insisted. "I'll win her back." "How?" "By drinking yourself into a stupor, by watching her every move in the papers." Eleanor stood up. "If you want Claire back, you need to become the man she deserved in the first place." After his mother left, Nathan sat there for a long time. Finally, he picked up his phone and made a call. "Dr. Roberts, I need help. I want to stop drinking." Across town, Claire sat in her new office at the Thompson Foundation. The view of Manhattan stretched out before her, but her mind was on the stack of applications on her desk. Women seeking help, looking for a chance to change their lives. "These are amazing proposals," James said, walking in without knocking. He'd been doing that more often lately. "You have a real eye for potential." Claire smiled, but shifted away slightly when he perched on her desk. "These women just need someone to believe in them, like you believed in me." "I more than believe in you, Claire." James reached for her hand. "I think you know that." Claire gently pulled away. "James, I'm not ready for that. My divorce isn't even final." "Nathan didn't wait for things to be final," James pointed out. "He didn't even wait for things to be over." "I'm not Nathan." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the glass walls, they could see Nathan being stopped by security. He looked different, thinner, more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. "Claire," he called out, "please, just 5 minutes." James moved to call security, but Claire held up her hand. "It's okay, let him in." Nathan stumbled slightly as he entered. Claire could smell alcohol on him. "You're drunk." "No, yes, but I'm getting help. Starting tomorrow, I'm checking into rehab." His eyes were red. "I wanted you to hear it from me." Claire felt her heart twist. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're still my emergency contact. Because despite everything, you're still the person I trust most in the world." He pulled out a crumpled paper. "I'm signing over control of the company to the board while I'm gone, and I'm signing our divorce papers." Claire took the papers with trembling hands. "Nathan, you deserve better than what I gave you. Better than what I am right now." He looked at James, then back at her. "I hope he makes you happy. I hope you get everything you deserve." After Nathan left, Claire sat at her desk, staring at the signed divorce papers. James touched her shoulder. "He's manipulating you," he said softly. "Don't let him pull you back in." But Claire wasn't so sure. For the first time since that night at the gala, she'd seen something real in Nathan's eyes. Not the polished businessman, not the charming society figure, just a broken man finally facing his demons. That night, alone in her apartment, Claire pulled out her phone and looked at old photos. She and Nathan on their first date at a hot dog stand because he couldn't afford anything better. Nathan teaching her to drive, both of them laughing as she stalled the car again and again. Simple moments before success had poisoned everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor Carlisle. "He's checked into Riverside Rehabilitation Center. 6 months minimum stay. He's really trying, Claire." Claire closed her eyes, tears falling. Success had changed Nathan, turned him into someone she didn't recognize. But maybe, just maybe, failure would bring back the man she'd fallen in love with. She looked at the divorce papers on her coffee table, still unsigned. 3 months passed. The Riverside Rehabilitation Center sat on 50 acres of manicured grounds, far from the chaos of Manhattan. Nathan stood at the window of his therapy room, watching leaves fall from the trees. He'd lost weight, and his designer suits had been replaced by simple jeans and sweaters. "You're making progress," Dr. Sarah Chen said, making notes in her pad. "But you're still avoiding talking about Claire." Nathan sat heavily in the leather chair. "What's there to say? I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too blind to see what I had." "Tell me about when you first met her." Nathan closed, his eyes remembering. "It was at a diner. My first company had just gone bankrupt. I couldn't even afford a decent meal. She was the waitress. I was so embarrassed counting change to pay for coffee. And she brought me a slice of pie, said it was on the house because I looked like I needed something sweet in my life." He smiled at the memory. "She sat with me during her break. Didn't care that I was a failure, just listened. When did things change? When I started succeeding, each deal made me hungry for more." Claire tried to keep up. She took etiquette classes, learned about wines, changed her wardrobe. But I wanted more. Someone who already fit that world. "Like Victoria?" Nathan laughed bitterly. "Victoria. You know what she said when the scandal broke? That she'd never meant to stay with me anyway. That I was just a stepping stone to meet bigger fish. Back in Manhattan, Claire was drowning in work. The foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations, but lately, something felt off. These budget numbers don't make sense," she told James, pointing at her computer screen. "We're missing almost $2 million from the education fund." James waved it off. "Probably just an accounting error. I'll have someone look into it." But Claire couldn't shake her suspicions. That night she stayed late digging through files. What she found made her blood run cold. The foundation was a front. James had been using it to launder money from his other businesses. The women they were supposed to be helping, only a fraction of the funds actually reached them. Her hands shook as she copied the files to a flash drive. She had to do something. But who could she trust? The answer came in the form of Eleanor Carlisle, who swept into her office the next morning. "Claire, darling, we need to talk." Eleanor closed the door. I've been doing some digging of my own, about James Thompson. Claire felt her heart race. What did you find? He's done this before. Sets up charities, uses them to hide money, then shuts them down when people get suspicious. Eleanor's eyes were hard. He's not interested in helping anyone. He's interested in tax evasion and looking good for the press. I have proof, Claire whispered, pulling out the flash drive. But if I go public, all these women we've been helping, they'll lose everything. Eleanor took her hand. Not if we're smart about this. Nathan's company, your name is still on half of it. We can transfer the foundation there, make it legitimate. Nathan's in rehab, but you're still his wife. You never signed those divorce papers, did you? Claire shook her head. Every time she'd tried, something had stopped her. That afternoon she drove to Riverside. The facility was beautiful, peaceful. Nothing like the cold skyscrapers of Manhattan. Nathan was in the garden reading. He looked different, healthier, more like the man she'd first fallen in love with. He looked up as she approached, his eyes widening. Claire, we have a problem, she said, sitting beside him, and I need your help. As she explained everything, the foundation, James's schemes, the women who would lose everything, Nathan listened intently. No interruptions, no quick fixes, just listening like he used to. Use the company, he said finally. It's as much yours as mine. Always was. I just forgot that. The board won't agree. They will if we do it together. He hesitated. Claire, I know I don't deserve another chance, but these past months have taught me what really matters. It was never about the money or the status. It was about doing something meaningful, like what you've been doing. Claire looked at him, really looked at him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something softer, more genuine. I'm not that naive girl anymore, she said quietly. I won't just forgive and forget. I don't want you to be that girl. I want you to be exactly who you are now, strong, confident. You're amazing. I just want a chance to be worthy of that person. In her purse, the unsigned divorce papers seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds, but there were more important things to deal with first. Let's take down James Thompson, she said. Then we'll talk about us. For the first time in months, hope flickered in Nathan's eyes, and somewhere in Claire's heart, a door she thought was permanently closed creaked open just a fraction. The boardroom at Carlyle Industries buzzed with tension. Claire sat at the head of the table, Nathan's seat, facing down 12 skeptical board members. The evidence of James Thompson's corruption lay scattered across the polished mahogany in neat folders. This is outrageous, George Patterson, the oldest board member, sputtered. You expect us to take on a failing foundation? Risk our reputation? I expect you to do what's right, Claire replied, her voice steady. These women trusted us. They built businesses, went back to school, supported their families. Are we going to let them become collateral damage in James Thompson's schemes? Eleanor Carlyle, sitting to Claire's right, spoke up. The Carlyle name used to mean something more than just profits. My late husband built this company on integrity. The room fell silent. Robert Carlyle's portrait hung on the wall, watching over them. The numbers don't lie, Claire continued. Even with the missing funds, the foundation's programs are successful. Imagine what we could do if we ran it honestly. Her phone buzzed. A text from Nathan at rehab. You've got this. Trust yourself. Just then the doors burst open. James Thompson strode in, his perfect smile now twisted with rage. This is a private meeting, Claire said, standing. Private conspiracy, you mean? James slammed his hands on the table. You really think you can steal my foundation? After everything I did for you? You mean after you used me as a front for your money laundering? Claire pulled up documents on the screen behind her. Wire transfers to offshore accounts, fake receipts, shell, companies. Should I go on? James's face went white. You're bluffing. The FBI doesn't think so. Claire nodded to the two men who had quietly entered behind James. Agent Roberts, Agent Chen, perfect timing. Everything happened fast after that. James was led away in handcuffs, shouting threats. News cameras caught it all. The great James. Thompson's empire crumbling in real time. Later that night, Claire sat alone in Nathan's old office, now temporarily hers. The city lights twinkled below. Her phone rang. Eleanor. The board voted unanimously, Eleanor said. The foundation is ours. And they want you to stay on as director. Claire felt tears of relief. Thank you, Eleanor, for everything. No, thank you, for reminding us what the Carlisle name should stand for. After hanging up, Claire drove to Riverside. It was past visiting hours, but the staff knew her now. Nathan was in the common room playing chess with an elderly man. Checkmate, the old man said, grinning. You're getting better, son, but still too reckless. Nathan looked up as Claire approached. How did it go? She told him everything, the board meeting, James's arrest, the foundation's future. Nathan listened, pride shining in his eyes. You did it, he said softly. You saved everything. We did it, Claire corrected. Your support, it mattered. They walked in the facility's garden. The night was cool, stars twinkling above. 4 more weeks, Nathan said. Then I'm done here. Claire nodded. Are you ready? For sobriety? Yes. For facing everything I've done? Getting there. He stopped, turning to face her. For trying to be worthy of a second chance. I'll spend the rest of my life working on that. Claire touched his cheek, feeling the rough stubble there. So different from his once perfectly smooth skin. Somehow she liked this better. It was real. I'm proud of you, she whispered. Even after everything? Especially after everything. It's easy to look perfect when life is perfect. It's how we handle our worst moments that shows who we really are. Nathan's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve you. Maybe not, Claire agreed. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe it's about growing together, becoming better together. She reached into her bag and pulled out the divorce papers, still unsigned. Slowly, deliberately, she tore them in half. Claire, this isn't forgiveness, she said quickly. Not yet. This is a new beginning. If you want it. Nathan took her, hand pressing it to his heart. No grand gestures, no flowery speeches. Just 2 people who had lost their way, finding each other again under the stars. Back in Manhattan, the news was breaking. Thompson Industries CEO arrested for fraud. But in a quiet garden in Riverside, none of that mattered. There was only this moment, this chance, this hope of something real rising from the ashes of what they'd almost lost. Nathan's last day at Riverside felt surreal. He packed his few belongings, the journals he'd filled during therapy, the sweaters that had replaced his designer suits, the chess set his elderly friend Harold had given him. 5 months of rebuilding himself, stripped down to the essentials. Remember what we talked about, Doctor? Chen said during their final session, success isn't about the money anymore. I know, Nathan nodded. It's about being someone I can be proud of. Claire waited outside in her car, not the chauffeur, not a limousine, just her, in the same blue Honda she'd driven when they first met. Some things had come full circle. Ready? She asked as he slid into the passenger seat. The drive back to Manhattan was quiet, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. The city skyline appeared on the horizon, gleaming and intimidating. We don't have to go straight back, Claire said, noticing his tension. We could take the long way. They ended up at Joe's Diner, the same place where they'd first met. It hadn't changed. The same cracked leather booths, the same smell of coffee and pie. Table for 2? The waitress was young, probably putting herself through college like Claire once had. They sat in their old booth. Claire ordered coffee. Nathan asked for water with lemon. Some things change, he said, holding up his glass with a small smile. Some things shouldn't. Claire pulled out a folder. The Foundation's first legitimate quarterly report. We've helped twice as many women now that the money's actually going where it should. Nathan read through the numbers, but his eyes kept drifting to Claire. She was passionate, animated, completely in her element. This was who she'd always been. He'd just been too blind to see it. There's something else, Claire said, hesitating. Victoria came to see me. Nathan's hand tightened on his glass. What did she want? To apologize, actually. She's writing a tell-all book about James Thompson. Apparently, she was working with the FBI the whole time. She had evidence of his crimes going back years. Nathan laughed, a genuine, surprised laugh. So even when I thought I was using her, she was using you, Claire finished. Life's funny that way. Their pie arrived, Apple for her, cherry for him, just like old times. The board wants me back next week, Nathan said quietly. But I've been thinking, maybe I shouldn't go back as CEO. Claire looked up, surprised. What do you mean? The foundation needs a proper business structure to grow. Real corporate backing, not just funding. But it also needs someone who understands both worlds, business and people. He met her eyes. It needs both of us. Nathan, co-CEOs, equal, partners, in everything. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. If you want. Claire was silent for a long moment. The last time we mixed business and marriage, we were different people. I was different. Nathan pulled out his 5-month sobriety chip. This time I know what matters. Outside, rain began to fall. The diner's neon sign reflected in puddles, just like the night they'd met. One condition, Claire said finally. We take it slow. The business first. Us, we'll see. Nathan nodded. It was more than he deserved. The waitress brought their check. Nathan reached for it, but Claire was faster. My treat, she said with a small smile. You look like you could use something sweet in your life. His own words from years ago when she'd been the waitress and he'd been broke. Now here they were, everything reversed, everything the same. As they walked to the car, Nathan stopped, under the diner's awning. Claire? She turned, rain making her hair shimmer under the neon lights. Thank you. Not just for today, for seeing something in me worth saving, even when I couldn't see it myself. Claire didn't answer. Instead, she stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek, soft, quick, but full of promise. They drove back to Manhattan through the rain. The city waited, full of challenges and opportunities, but this time they'd face them together, equal partners, in business, and maybe someday, in love again. The first day back at Carlisle Industries felt strange. Nathan and Claire rode the elevator together, both nervous in their own ways. The board meeting was set for 9, where they'd announce their new partnership. Look who's back, a familiar voice called out. Victoria Stone stood in the lobby, dressed for business. And looking so ordinary. Nathan tensed, but Claire squeezed his arm. Ms. Stone, here to give a statement about James Thompson? Victoria's smile faltered. Among other things, the FBI wants to know about certain offshore accounts. I thought your husband might help refresh my memory. Ex-husband, Nathan said firmly, and I've already told the FBI everything I know. The boardroom was packed, not just board members, but reporters too. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, running the show like always. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, today marks a new chapter for Carlisle Industries. My son Nathan has returned, not as CEO, but as co-director of our new charitable division, alongside his wife Claire. Whispers filled the room. Someone raised a hand. Mrs. Carlisle, aren't you two divorced? No, Claire answered simply. We're working on our marriage, just like we're working on this company. The presentation went smoothly. Claire showed the foundation's success stories, women starting businesses, families lifted from poverty. Nathan handled the financial projections, proving how doing good could also mean doing well. But trouble was brewing. Victoria lingered after the meeting, cornering Nathan in his office. Remember that night in the Hamptons, she purred, when you told me all about James's dirty dealings? The FBI would love to hear that recording. Nathan felt his world spin. That night, drunk and bitter, he'd spilled everything he knew about James Thompson's illegal activities. Not because he was working with the FBI, but because he'd wanted to impress Victoria. What do you want? Oh, nothing much. Just your support when I take over Thompson Industries. After all, they'll need new leadership once James is in prison. Claire walked in just then, catching the end of Victoria's threat. Actually, she said, pulling out her phone, the FBI would love to hear this conversation too. Victoria went pale. The phone was recording. Blackmail's a crime, Victoria, Claire continued. Add that to conspiracy and fraud charges. Well, I'm no lawyer, but it doesn't look good. After security escorted Victoria out, Nathan slumped in his chair. Claire, I'm so sorry. That night in the Hamptons was before we decided to start over, Claire finished. We all have things we regret. What matters is what we do now. That evening they worked late together, going over foundation proposals. It felt natural, comfortable, like old times but better. Remember our first apartment? Claire asked suddenly. That tiny studio above the Chinese restaurant? Nathan smiled. Where the smoke alarm went off every time they cooked. We were happy. There. We were. Nathan looked at her. I forgot that somewhere along the way. That happiness isn't about where you live or what you own. Claire stood up, stretching. It's late. We should go home. Home? Nathan's heart skipped. Well, my home. The guest room is made up for you. If you want. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even close to what they'd had before, but it was real and it was theirs. That night in Claire's apartment, they ordered Chinese food and sat on the floor like they used to. No crystal glasses, no expensive wine. Just two people finding their way back to what mattered. To new beginnings, Claire said, holding up her soda can. Nathan clinked his water glass against it. To remembering what was good about the old ones. Outside, Manhattan glittered, full of temptations and challenges, but in that moment everything they needed was right there in that room. 3 months passed. The foundation flourished under Nathan and Claire's joint leadership, but just as things seemed perfect, the past came knocking. You have a visitor, their secretary announced one morning. Mrs. Rebecca Thompson, James Thompson's wife, stood in their office, elegant even in distress. I need your help. James is planning something from prison. Claire gestured for her to sit. What do you mean? He's been making calls, moving money we didn't know existed. Rebecca's hands shook. He's trying to destroy everything you've built, starting with the foundation. Nathan and Claire exchanged glances. They'd worked too hard to let James ruin things now. He's selling company secrets, Rebecca continued, to your competitors, and she hesitated. Victoria Stone is helping him. Nathan felt sick. Those drunken conversations in the Hamptons. How much had he revealed without realizing? Claire took charge. We'll need proof, records of the calls, transactions. I have everything here. Rebecca pulled out a flash drive. James never thought I was smart enough to spy on him. Just like he never thought you were smart enough to catch him, Claire. That night, Nathan and Claire worked late, going through Rebecca's evidence. Their shoulders touched as they leaned over the computer screen. The closeness felt both familiar and new. Look at this, Claire pointed. Wire transfers to the Cayman Islands, all through companies Victoria owns. We can't let them win, Nathan said. Not after everything. Claire turned to face him. Their faces were inches apart. We won't. For a moment, it seemed like he might kiss her. Instead, he stood up, pacing. I need to tell you something. About Victoria. About everything I told her. Whence is Nathan? Claire's voice was gentle. The past is the past. What matters is what we do now. The next day brought chaos. Victoria held a press conference, claiming Nathan had been part of James's schemes all along. The stock prices plummeted, but Claire had a plan. She called an emergency board meeting. As Victoria's accusations played on every news channel, Claire calmly presented their evidence. Not just Rebecca's files, but recordings, documents, a paper trail leading straight back to Victoria and James. They thought we were weak, Claire told the board. They thought they could destroy us. But they forgot something important. What's that? Eleanor asked, smiling like she already knew the answer. That love makes you stronger, not weaker. Claire looked at Nathan. That trusting someone, believing in them, fighting for them, that's real power. The board voted unanimously to support them. The FBI arrested Victoria that afternoon. James faced new charges that would add years to his sentence. Later in their office, Nathan watched Claire handle reporters' calls with grace. She'd grown so much from the shy waitress he'd first met. Or maybe she'd always been this strong, and he'd just been too blind to see it. Claire, he said when she hung up, let's go home. She looked at him, really looked at him. Home? Your home. Our home. Whatever you want it to be. He took her hand. I just know I don't want to spend another night away from you. Claire squeezed his hand. The guest room's getting pretty lonely. That night they didn't need words. Years of love, months of pain, weeks of rebuilding. It all led to this moment. Nathan and Claire finding their way back to each other, stronger for having been broken. The city lights twinkled outside their window, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy writing their own story, one that had nothing to do with money, or power or revenge. This was about love, the kind that forgives, the kind that heals, the kind that makes you better than you ever thought you could be. Nathan woke up to sunlight streaming through Claire's bedroom window. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. But Claire's warm body next to him was real, her steady breathing, a reminder that some dreams do come true. His phone buzzed, a text from Rebecca Thompson. Turn on the news now. On every channel, the story was the same. James Thompson had escaped during a prison transfer. Victoria Stone was missing too. Claire stirred beside him. What's wrong? Before he could answer, Eleanor burst into the apartment. They're going after the foundation. All the accounts are being drained. Claire jumped into action, calling their bank while Nathan contacted the FBI. But they were too late. Millions of dollars, meant for women and families in need, gone. Should have seen this coming, Nathan paced. Should have known they wouldn't give up. This isn't your fault, Claire touched his arm. But I know how we can fix it. Her plan was risky. They would use their personal fortunes as collateral to keep the foundation running. Everything they owned, their homes, their investments, even Claire's grandmother's jewelry. You'd risk everything? Nathan asked. After all we've been through, Claire smiled. Some things are worth the risk. The media caught wind of their decision. Headlines screamed, Carlyle's bet everything on charity. The story caught fire. Donations started pouring in from across the country. Then came the call they'd been waiting for. A tip about Victoria's location. It's a trap, Eleanor warned. Let the FBI handle it. But Nathan and Claire knew they had to face this themselves. They tracked Victoria to an old warehouse by the pier, the same place where Nathan had first pitched his company to investors back when he had nothing but dreams. Victoria was waiting for them. How sweet. The happy couple together again. It's over, Victoria, Nathan said. The FBI is on their way. You think I care? She laughed. James and I are leaving the country, but first we're going to watch everything you love burn. She pulled out a gun, but Claire was faster. She knocked Victoria down, the gun sliding across the floor. Years of self-defense classes. Another thing Nathan had never known about his wife, paying off. James appeared from the shadows, but Nathan was ready. The man who had once intimidated him now looked small, desperate. You're pathetic, Nathan said. Both of you. Living off other people's pain. Police sirens wailed in the distance. James tried to run, but Claire blocked the exit. Victoria reached for the gun, but Nathan kicked it away. You know what your biggest mistake was? Claire asked as the FBI stormed. Just thinking love makes people weak, it makes them stronger. Later at home, Nathan held Claire close. You amaze me today. You always amaze me. We amazed me, Claire corrected. Together. The foundation not only survived but grew stronger. The publicity brought more donors, more support. Women who'd been helped came forward to volunteer, creating a network of strength and hope. Nathan watched Claire lead a group meeting, her eyes shining as another woman shared her success story. This was what real power looked like. Not corner offices or designer suits, but lives changed, hearts healed. I love you, he whispered when she returned to his side. Not because you're strong or successful, but because you make me want to be better. Claire took his hand. Then be better with me, every day. Outside, the city hummed with life. But inside, in the quiet of their rebuilt love, Nathan and Claire had found something more precious than all the wealth and power they'd ever chased. They'd found home. 1 year later, the Preston Hotel's grand ballroom sparkled again, but this time, Nathan stood proud with Claire by his side as they celebrated the foundation's most successful year yet. Who would have thought, Eleanor said, watching them greet guests, that my son's biggest mistake would lead to his greatest triumph? The foundation had grown beyond their dreams. Thousands of women helped, hundreds of businesses started, lives transformed across the country. But the biggest transformation had been in Nathan and Claire themselves. Victoria and James were in prison, their schemes exposed. Rebecca Thompson had taken over her husband's company, turning it into a force for good. She sat at a table now, chatting with other business leaders about ethical investing. "Remember the last time we were here?" Claire asked Nathan as they danced. "When everything fell apart?" "When everything started coming together," he corrected. "I just didn't know it then." The music slowed. Claire rested her head on his shoulder, remembering how far they'd come. The shy waitress and the ambitious businessman, broken apart by success, brought back together by failure. "I have something to tell you," Claire whispered. Nathan looked down at her. "What is it?" She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. His eyes widened. "Really?" Claire nodded, tears sparkling. "Really?" They swayed together, lost in their own world. Around them, life went on. Eleanor discreetly wiped her eyes. Amy, Claire's old friend, snapped photos for the foundation's newsletter. The women they'd helped raised glasses in celebration. "You know," Nathan said softly, "I spent years chasing what I thought was success. Big deals, fancy parties, the perfect image. And now I know what real success looks like." He touched her cheek. "It looks like you, running the foundation. Like the women whose lives we've changed. Like our baby, growing inside you." Claire smiled through happy tears. "We did good, didn't we? We did better than good, we did right." Later that night, they stood on their apartment balcony. The city stretched before them, full of possibilities. But the greatest possibility was right. Here, two people who had lost their way found each other again and built something beautiful from the ruins of their mistakes. "I love you," Nathan said, holding her close. "Not the way I did before, young and blind and selfish, but the way you deserve, with everything I am." Claire turned in his arms. "I love you too, not despite our past, but because of it. Because we chose to be better, together." Inside, their phones buzzed with congratulations. The foundation's success story was being featured in major newspapers. Their model was being copied across the country. But none of that mattered as much as this moment. Nathan kissed his wife, really kissed her, like he had on their first date when he had nothing to offer but his heart. Claire kissed him back, like she had that night, seeing the man he could be, the night wrapped around them like a blanket. Below, the city pulsed with energy. Above, stars twinkled their approval, and here in this moment, two people who had weathered life's greatest storms stood together. Stronger for having been broken, richer for having lost everything, and happier than all their previous success had ever made them, because they had found the greatest truth of all, that love, real love, isn't about being perfect, it's about being perfect for each other, through every mistake, every triumph, every new beginning, forever.